Hello, today I'm going to look at the practicum assessment tool. I'm going to review where you find it in Blackboard and how you complete it for your midterm and for your final assessment within the practicum course. So when you enter into Blackboard, you're going to see along the left-hand side an icon for practicum assessment tool. You will click on this, you will go into the evaluation folder, and you will click on the practicum assessment tool link. This will then open the tool within Word. When the tool opens in Word, you may see that it looks like this and that you're not able to enter data into the sections that are required. What you will need to do is go into View, Edit Document, and it will pull up an area that you can now type into the different aspects of the full form. What you will need to do next then is to save the form. When you save the form, you need to save it with your first, your last name, and then you can put PAT Assessment BSCN Year 1. Okay. You need to have your name in the saved title so that your CPS can identify it as your assessment tool. Once you have done that, this form has fillable sections. So you can click or tap on the area that you want to enter data, and then you would enter in things like your name. Okay. So students on this very first page are going to fill out all of the data up until completed practicum hours. Then your CPS will fill in that area. Your CPS will also fill in canceled practicum, any student absences, and any additional supports that were implemented to support you through the last few weeks. The last part is whether or not your practicum learning portfolio was satisfactory. This is something you're also going to be handing in with this form. And your CPS will then mark it as satisfactory or not in this section. If we continue down in the form, okay, you will see this gives you information on exactly how the form needs to be completed, okay, and then you will get down to what we call the learning outcomes. For the midterm, you will need to complete learning outcomes 1 to 3. For the final, you will complete all of the learning outcomes outlined in this document. So what will happen is this is sort of a collaborative form where the student will complete the entire form and then they will send it to the CPS. So the student will look at each of the competencies outlined and the learning outcomes. So for the first one, comfortably initiates therapeutic relationship. And these are the competency indicators that we would expect the student to be demonstrating in relation to this competency. The student reflect on their own practice and identify whether or not they feel they met, are just approaching this learning competency. If a learning plan has been put in place to support them, they can outline it here, or if it has not been assessed, it would be outlined there as well. For competency indicators 1, 2, 3 for midterm, we would expect that students would be meeting or at least approaching all of these areas. So what the student will do then is they will mark with an S in the area in which they feel that they are, okay? And they will do that for all of the indicators for the learning outcomes 1 to 3 for midterm, and then for final, they will do it for all of the learning outcomes in the document. The CPS, when they review the document, will go back through where the student has identified themselves, and they will either agree with the student, in which case they don't need to put anything in. If they feel differently than the student, and they would put an asterisk in the area that they feel the student is at in terms of their learning. If there is something in the approaching or not assessed or learning plan, they would need to click on the midterm reflection and add text in here. Same with the student. If you do not put met for a particular outcome, you need to put a little bit of a description of why you haven't met that outcome and the plan that you have in place in order to achieve that outcome. So anytime that anything is not met, we would expect that there would be some documentation of that in this section. And so the student can use black colored ink to fill in that section, and the CPS can just change to a different colored text in order to be able to differentiate between the two people's writing. The other aspect of the form that needs to be completed by both the student and the CPS is the midterm and final comments and notes. So what here is the student and the CPS will reflect on what things the student does quite well, perhaps some of their weaker areas, and identify strategies for addressing some of their weaknesses. And so again, the student would write in this first, and then the CPS would use a different colored ink to add their own comments to this section. Okay. And then what we see is that this will go back and forth, and at the end, if during the meeting there is agreement, both the student and the mentor will sign the form. So again, there's a section for you to complete it for midterm and a separate section for the final. The other aspect that also needs to be completed is the nursing skills checklist. So again, the student will look at the different skills within the checklist. They will identify whether they're meeting, approaching, not meeting, or not assessed for that particular skill. The CPS will identify whether this was observed at midterm or final. And the student may have performed skills in the agency that the CPS has not had direct observation. And so if that's the case, the student would need to identify which ones they feel that these are. Okay. Any notes about competencies or needed for ways for improving in a particular skill would go into the notes section. So this would be done for all of the skills in relation to this. The last section that I just want to point out to you is the defining rubric for the levels of evaluation. So you can see here that this really outlines, what does it mean for student competence to check off meeting or approaching, okay, or to have a learning plan, or if it's not assessed. So it's important that before you even begin the process of completing this form, you take a look at these appendices at the end so that you can see what the different areas mean in terms of checking them off. So again, this form will be completed at midterm. It will then be built upon and completed again for the final. Students are required to submit it electronically to their CPS in week 7 for midterm in preparation to meet with their CPS in week 8 about it. They again then submit it in week 13, okay, in preparation to meet in week 14 at the college to discuss their final review. The other thing that is part of this is submitting a practicum learning portfolio. Okay. This is a binder that would document all of the work that has been completed in relation to this course. Okay. It would show completion of the weekly modules of 1 to 6. It would contain the performance checklist the student's been working through, any of the assessment tools that they've also been working through, and any post-conference work that would support evidence of achieving any of the learning outcomes. This is really a binder that can be kept together to show evidence of your ability to achieve the learning outcomes outlined in the PAT. Okay. So again, a hard copy of the practicum learning portfolio is submitted to your CPS in week 7 and then again in week 13. This is going to then inform the midterm and the final review, and your CPS will evaluate it for whether or not it is satisfactory or unsatisfactory. The portfolio should be easy to follow, it should be clearly laid out, and you may wish to use dividers or a table of contents to help your CPS be able to navigate your binder. The other thing that you will also be submitting with your portfolio is your reflective clinical note. And you can see the previous screencast on information about completing that. All of the documents that you then submit in your PAT and your portfolio will be reviewed by your CPS. They will provide feedback on the documents. They will also document any differences in the PAT that they see of your assessment of your competencies with an asterisk. Okay. They will be reviewed together between you and your CPS again in week 8 and then at the final in week 14, and any inconsistencies will be discussed at that time for resolution. If the midterm review is not satisfactory, your faculty lead will be notified. For your final, when you go through this process again, any unmet competencies require further documentation within the PAT. Okay, you will review it at the college instead of at your agency time in week 14 for the final review. And at that time, a printed copy of the documents will be printed and signed by the student and the CPS. And the student will be provided a PDF e-copy for their own records. Okay? Any unsatisfactory assessments, the CPS will notify the faculty lead. So this is really the process of completing the midterm and the final assessments. Okay, it requires collaboration between the student and the CPS. Okay, hopefully, if any issues are identified at the midterm review, then they can be a collaborative plan between the CPS and the student can be made in order to help the student be successful. So I hope that provides some clarity on this process. Okay, so thank you.